Hello, hello. Hopefully, everyone is doing okay this morning. Um, let's see here. I want to make sure that I am coming through loud and clear. So, if you could please let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay, that would be very helpful. Um, so, as you can see from the title, I want to take just a few minutes on this lovely Friday afternoon to discuss what's going on in Maui. Um, I am still currently uh, in the uh, in the other house. We are actually covered in paint. That's why I'm not live right now. Um, or I'm sorry. That's why you don't see me on the screen right now. And I'm also working on the back end, all of the different channels that I'm streaming on. So it looks like I am live on Rockfin. So hello to our Rockfin followers. Thank you for that. To our YouTube followers, thank you for that as well. Just a couple of things I want to remind people. We are currently on our second strike on our main YouTube channel. So we do have a backup channel. It's called Book of Hours Media. It's right on YouTube. You can't miss it. So please go there and hit subscribe or follow, uh, just in case we lose this channel. And with some of the things that I might be talking about, we may. So, but I'm not too worried about it. We have so many different projects that are, on the back burner right now. What's front and center for us is the new house. We have spent the last 2 or 3 days priming the house and fixing the ceiling so that we can paint um, this one room, this one huge room, which is going to be a dedicated music room and a dedicated creative space. One of our many creative spaces in the house, but it needed to be repainted. So we're doing that ourselves to save a little money. Contractors are expensive and they're very slow, and we're running out of time and we're running out of money. So we just decided to do it ourselves. And that's why I'm not on camera, because I'm a complete mess. I have paint in my hair, paint under my fingernails. I'm just a mess. So I don't want that to be a distraction from some of the things that I want to talk about today. Um, so let me just uh, check my live feed over on YouTube. There we go. Sounds good. All right. And thank you for those of you who have commented in the chat. I'm on many different platforms, so thank you so much for letting me know that you can hear me. I really appreciate that. Okay. So now that a few more people are joining, so there's so many different narratives going around regarding the Maui situation. Um, and it's a little bit it's a little bit, there's some truth to it, and then there are people that simply because of who they are and their backgrounds and their economic demographics, and I'm talking about influencers, and I'm talking about assets, sometimes the influencers that stream their really great videos and their really high energy, very emotional videos, sort of lead you down the wrong path, but then they put little bits of truth in between what they're saying. So the reason I titled this Maui is designated for debt, not a smart city, is because I believe that that's what's going to happen. And the only reason that I say that is based on my own personal experience, my own actual lived experience of what I've witnessed. Hello, Sean. Thank you for joining. Unfortunately, not so gorgeous today, covered in paint. We're dealing with fixing up a new house. As you know, as I've said in every broadcast over the last few times, we are in the process of leaving Pittsburgh and moving to the Gulf. So the Gulf Coast of the United States. And we found a house, a beautiful house that fits our needs much more than the Pittsburgh location does. So we were there for 5 years. And so now we're in the process of moving. We closed on the house a few months ago. It's probably going to take another month or two before it's complete. But in the meantime, I didn't want to leave some of the things that I have to say about this situation. I didn't want to leave it unsaid because nobody else is talking about this. Many people are saying that Maui is designated to be a smart city. I don't believe that that's the case. If you look at especially Lahaina, which was a vacation destination spot for the quasi wealthy. Now, you didn't have to be super rich to go on vacation there, but it was starting to get pretty bougie, right? And those types of places are not typically designated for smart city infrastructure. We already have a city that is basically being burned to the ground, but not with fire, but with horrible corruptive and decayed and corroded policy. And that city is San Francisco. San Francisco is going to be a designated smart city. You can see it clearly. I lived there for 35 years. I've watched it happen. Everything about that city is a designated smart city. It's how close it is geographically to China, for instance, makes it the prime real estate for smart city infrastructure. Even before COVID, the mayor of um, Sean, you totally make me laugh, which is what I need these days. Even the mayor of San Francisco um, announced in 2019 that they had closed down a major street in San Francisco, California called Market Street. They closed it down to traffic, and the only thing that it was open for were bikes and maybe some buses, and that's it. So it was a major thoroughfare in the middle of the city. So even back in 2019, before COVID and before lockdowns and before people were told that they couldn't go to work anymore, they had already started. And in fact, I would say that they've started implementing smart city infrastructure in San Francisco all the way back in the 90s. I saw it with my own eyes. That is a city that is primed and ready for smart city infrastructure. Maui is not. Maui is going to be something else, and it's going to go something like this. And the reason I say this is because of where I'm currently leaving, which is Pittsburgh. And what I've seen for the last 5 years is called a debt sort of a debt industrial complex where you take neighborhoods and you take portions of the city or the outer lying neighborhoods that are usually designated federal opportunity zones, meaning like this place is so poor, they need a leg up, they need help. So we're going to designate it a zone. And then within that zone, you can then open up basically money laundering schemes, which have to do with nonprofits, incubators, and banks that no one's ever heard of, which will then funnel money in from either through, from wealthy people or either through uh, the tech industry or through bigger banks or through bigger nonprofits or even through tax incentives. So you funnel money through these incubators, through very small little local nonprofits that do things like, give diapers to poor single mothers kind of thing, really small nonprofits. You funnel money through incubators, and I'll tell you what an incubator is in a minute. Or you funnel the money through these really, really tiny, tiny community banks that no one's ever really heard of. And they are set up to offer loans, to offer programs, to offer incentives to the poor people who are either burned out of their homes or burned out of their um, yeah, exactly. It's money laundering, it's money washing. They're designed to um, allow those people to take up loans. Now, I'm going to tell you the story about somebody that I know personally in Pittsburgh. I'm going to leave her name out of it because I don't want to embarrass her. But I met this individual in 2018, 2019, a really excellent head for business. Okay. She was very creative. She had a very creative um, footprint in the city of Pittsburgh. She had already established a very successful business on her own in one neighborhood, and she found a building that she absolutely fell in love with in my neighborhood. And this building was kind of sold to a nonprofit, like say 40 years ago. I don't know exactly when, but let's say it was like 40 years ago. This building was sold to a nonprofit for like $1. Okay, well, when she said that she wanted to have this building to run her second business in the Pittsburgh area, they jacked up the cost of the building to $300,000. But because she was opening up the business in an opportunity zone, it allowed her to have an option to get a loan to cover the cost of the business. And so for the first year or year and a half or so, it was like an interest-free loan. All right, so this is an individual who's got a good head for business, very creative. Um, that I don't want to give too much away about her. Some of her creative endeavors I didn't really appreciate aesthetically, but many people did, and so I appreciate what she brought to the Pittsburgh community. So she got involved with this incubator. She got involved with some nonprofits, and she got involved with these banks that like no one's ever really heard of, and she took out a loan and she was able to start her business. And for a few months everything was okay. The business did not do well because her demographic wasn't there to support her. Her customer base does not live in an opportunity zone. Her customer base lives outside of an opportunity zone. So they would have to come in to an opportunity zone, which is typically a neighborhood of deep poverty, in order to spend the money to purchase what she needed them to purchase in order to keep her business afloat, in order for her to make the loan. So she could never make the loan. So she ended up defaulting on the loan. She ended up not paying taxes for running her business. And this was all done under the marketing scheme of, we're here to help you. We're just going to give you money. We're just going to throw a ton of money into these opportunity zones so that small businesses like yours in the Pittsburgh neighborhood can really flourish and really thrive. And she fell for it. And so this is what they're going to do to Maui. Is when you see Oprah Winfrey going live in Maui, talking to, basketball players who make billions of dollars a year, or talking to other, philanthropic people who have tons of money that they want to open up these funding streams and these foundations and these nonprofit, Power for Maui kind of thing, these websites that are suddenly, popping up out of nowhere where you can donate your money. It's going to be funded through these incubators and through these small banks that no one's ever heard of. It's going to provide a tax incentive for the people who are donating the money. And then they're going to go out to the ravaged communities of Maui, especially Lahaina, and say, now, if you want to keep your property and you want to run your business, then all you have to do is take out this loan, and you don't have to pay interest on it for like a year, and then we're going to come back to collect later. Meanwhile, the the popular people like the Oprah Winfreys and the corporations that are donating to these Maui funding streams, they're all getting kickbacks through, in the form of tax incentives, like maybe they don't have to pay their taxes this year. Okay. Now, there's another aspect to this. Okay, so let me go back to my friend. My friend who I know personally defaulted on her loan, cannot run her business, scribbled a note on her business in my community that said, "We're closed, we're done," and disappeared off of the face of the earth. She's running away from her debt. She's evading paying her taxes. And she's on the hook for this, right? She has been forced to, I hate to say this, guys, but a very successful businesswoman who had made a strong imprint in the Pittsburgh area, who had everything in the world going for her, very creative, good head for business, has the only way that she can really earn an income is basically by kind of stripping online. She has a very small, like, TikTok account and a very small Instagram account, and she's basically, like, stripping for dollars online. That's what she has been that's what she's been reduced to, okay? This is a system that destroys people, okay? You're not gonna get a smart city in Maui. What you're gonna get is exactly what I just described. Maui doesn't have the infrastructure for smart cities. Maui was a Airbnb, hang out by the beach, go get a cup of coffee at a fancy coffee shop, maybe go into a boutique and get like a really expensive swimsuit, you know what I mean? Maui doesn't have the infrastructure for a smart city. So the Max Egans out there, the Crow House out there, those kind of people, they're totally leading you down the wrong path. Maui is going to set up the same kind of money washing and funding stream that I see in Pittsburgh every day, and which affected my friend so much so that she had to disappear off the planet and it resorted to and had to be reduced to basically stripping for dollars online. And these people are they're so desperate. You get people through desperation, or like in my friend's case, she was really on a roll. She was really successful with her one business already. So she had these vultures swarming around her, telling her how great she was and that she could really make an impact in Pittsburgh if she, branched out her business. So she needed to take a $300,000 loan to do it and pay taxes that she's never had to pay before. She was doing fine. She didn't need any of this, but she fell in love with this really beautiful old building and really wanted to buy it and run her business out of it. I don't blame her. So this is what is going to be. I'm not going to say that the people in Maui. I'm not saying the people in Maui are going to have the same future as my friend in Pittsburgh. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, like Anna says, that most foundations and nonprofits, if not all, are backed by the UN, WEF, and we're very hidden behind NGOs, celebrities, and corporations, including many so-called alternative foundations. Exactly. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying this, as well to illustrate that it's not a smart city. With a smart city, you need the infrastructure, and Maui just does not have that kind of infrastructure. You will see it in San Francisco, though, eventually. Right now, they're in the process of clearing out the city. Um, so there's another aspect to this that I wanted to bring up as well. If a place is a designated federal emergency zone or a federal opportunity zone, then and you are within that zone going through some kind of, circumstance, then you are fast tracked. You are fast tracked into Section 8 housing. You are fast tracked for tax incentives, even people on their mortgage. If you pick up a mortgage, your mortgage company, they're required by federal law to say, are you impacted somehow by COVID-19? Are you unable to make your mortgage payments due to COVID-19? If so, click here and you will have some sort of incentive to either, you know, maybe we can put your mortgage on hold for a few months until you're out of your emergency. So these types of events, and that's what they are events. Sometimes they're weather related, sometimes they're economic, sometimes they're health related, but they are events that are created in order to designate a federal emergency system. So the federal emergency funding will then be funneled into, for instance, these lending companies. These lending companies want these individuals to say, oh, yeah, I have COVID, because then they can go back to the federal government and say, look at all of the people that are on mortgages with us, and 80% of them have COVID. We need more funding from the government in order to cover their mortgages. You see what I'm saying? Because the people can't pay because they have COVID because they can't work. It's just a scam. And so they're designating, you know, fast tracking uh, social safety nets like Section 8 housing, like, if you're on a loan somewhere and you've gone through some sort of designated emergency, whether it's COVID, whether it's a Maui fire, whether it's a Paradise fire, whatever, the federal government will swoop in and say, this is now a designated emergency zone. And therefore, here are all your incentives. This is why, check it out, this is why your family or even a single person in Maui has been able to slide right into Section 8 housing without a waiting list and without having to go through red tape and bureaucracy. Whereas an individual I know in Southern California whose husband died and was left homeless because he didn't prepare for a sudden death and, he just didn't wake up one day. She's been homeless for 5 years and has been waiting to slide into her Section 8 housing for 5 years. She can't afford, the apartments, the current market rate for apartments on her own. You see what I'm saying? So if she had said, I have COVID, or if the area that she lived in had somehow experienced a wildfire or a flood or something, then she would be living under the banner of a federal emergency. So she would have been able to get in faster. See what I'm saying? So this is why they want to make like the entire country sort of like a designated emergency zone so that not because they're concerned about people being homeless, clearly not, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but because as long as the federal government is working in tandem with the private sector or these social safety nets, then that's where you get fascism, right? So it's a very, so and nowhere in what I just explained to you, in that scenario that I just explained to you, nowhere do you hear smart city infrastructure. Do you know how expensive it is to build out smart city infrastructure? It's very expensive. And you have to have the infrastructure already in place. There is no infrastructure already in place in Maui. That is not what Maui is designated for. Maui is designated for debt. Maui is designated to turn each and every individual who has been affected by the event to turn them into a source for creating debt, which then gives the people like the Oprahs and the foundations and the corporations and even, you know, other interested parties, all sorts of kickbacks and incentives. These people are little gold mines to these vultures. These people who are now unhoused, these people who are the victims of this event, they're little gold mines to them. They're not going to waste their money building in expensive technology and smart city infrastructure. That's not what's going to happen. So I wanted to push that information out there because so many people are just going down the wrong road as usual and leading a lot of people astray. So and now I want to talk about some of the psychological aspects of the emergency, the state of emergency that some cities are in. For instance, Lahaina, Maui is in kind of a state of emergency. There are, you know, zones where people can't get back into their homes, so they're living under this banner of like an emergency victim. So they're living in shelters or they're living, who knows what's going on with them. There's also, a large swathe of the population that's missing. Obviously, a big portion of that are children. Um, so all of this is creating, a psychological effect. All of this is creating neuroses. All of this is creating an emotional vulnerability in these people, anxiety, tension. And when you have that, you open up that sort of situation, you open it up to chaos. When people are vulnerable, they don't have their head on straight. They're too emotionally involved. that's when chaos is able to really come in and uproot things even more. So whether these are chaotic endeavors from, the Oprah Winfrey's of the world, or whether they're chaotic endeavors from, people who are just trying to take advantage of a bad situation, right? So what's happening in San Francisco is the exact same thing. You've got so much chaos and you have so much corruption within the leadership there, from the mayor all the way down to the various supervisors that are supposed to represent each and every district within that small city, which is only 49 square miles. And it's three quarters surrounded by water. And it's a major international hub. That's why it is going to be a designated smart city and not Lahaina. Um, but what you have there too is another, like, something else that's happening on an emotional level that not too many people are talking about. And you've got all these citizens that live in these certain neighborhoods that are out there with their phones and with their recording devices. And they are taking pictures and taking video of what's actually going on in San Francisco. And no influencer like Max Egan and no asset like other people are even talking about it. Do you realize yesterday that there were 18 body bags that were removed from SROs? Do you know what SROs are? They're single room occupancies. So you guys know what happened in San Francisco a couple of years ago, right? A harm reduction policy was created and it's federally funded, right? And it's funded through the HHS. It's called harm reduction. And they took these single room occupancies, which are, typically a couple of hundred a night, whatever, and they turned them into safe spaces for drug addicts to go and do drugs. So it's kind of like the Wicked Witch in the middle of the forest luring Hansel and Gretel into the gingerbread house so that she can cook them alive. That's exactly what it is. So these drug addicts were lured into the SROs for free, where they could safely, under this policy called harm reduction, safely do their drugs. And yesterday alone, they pulled out 18 dead bodies from the SROs. 18 dead bodies in one day. And yet no one's talking about it. Where are your influencers talking about what's going on in San Francisco? Cafe International, which was the very first cafe in the middle of the Haight district, where I gave my very first poetry reading back in the 90s. The owner of Cafe International announced on his Instagram page, I need to take 5 days and figure out what the fuck to do. This city is being destroyed from within. Um, I'm losing my city right and left. Every single day, I'm dealing with theft. Every single day, I'm dealing with violence of some sort, whether it's from bureaucracy. I'm being fined. My windows are being destroyed. I am in such debt to repair companies that keep having to come in and repair my business. I have to take out loans. Like, this is a guy that's been in business for, I don't know, at least 50 years, let's say. But and an 85-year-old restaurant just recently closed its doors. All these little cutesy shops, boutique shops in San Francisco gone. Parks are overrun with homeless people and drug addicts, okay? And there's a real effort to create a narrative out there on social media. They're assets. I want to say that a Facebook page called Baghdad by the Bay is an asset. And what they're doing is they only take beautiful pictures of beautiful buildings and beautiful views of San Francisco, and they're not telling the truth, and they're there to lure people into a false sense of security, into a false sense of this idea that San Francisco is fine. But 18 body bags were hauled out of single room occupancy apartments or dwellings yesterday alone. I want to say that in the year 2023 so far, there have been over 2,400 fentanyl related deaths. Now, don't quote me on that. This is based on, some information that the Twitter people that live there, that are calculating these deaths on their own. There's not even an organization that's like taking stock of how many people have died. And yet Where are your influencers and where are your favorite podcasters talking about this? They're just going on and on and on about what a shitty city San Francisco is now, but they're not talking about the death. Now, let's talk about the children, especially the poor kids who have to go to more like urban centered schools. Some of these people who live in these neighborhoods were taking their phones out and recording what the children have to go through every single day. So, in order to go from their apartments or their homes to the bus stop, in order to take them to school, they have to walk over broken glass, human excrement lying on the street, junkies acting like zombies. And these kids have to walk with their head down, hands in their pockets, their backpacks on, in a straight line to walk over all of this disgusting, humiliating experience. And so, what are you doing to those kids that they have to do this day in and day out? They have to see it 5 days a week, maybe sometimes twice a day. What are you doing to these kids? You are normalizing the degrading experience of human life. You're normalizing the degradation of your human experience so that these kids are going to become immune to people rolling around in their own feces, broken glass, needles hanging out of arms, exposed genitalia, disgusting things that you would never, ever, ever want your children, you know, s- second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, you would never, ever want these kids to see something like that. And they have to walk through it, and the smell and the sights of this are an assault on their senses. And over time, they become immune to it so that they're incapable of showing compassion towards these individuals. It is so much easier to scream and yell and do podcasts about Lahaina and oh these poor victims and how they were, I'm not saying that it's not bad. That's not what I'm saying, but nobody's responding in that same way to what's happening in San Francisco. Why? Because there is such a stigma when it comes to drug addiction, or is there such a stigma when it comes to homelessness? You know, everybody going through a tragedy deserves the same kind of response from the podcaster industrial complex or the influencers out there that you all follow. And yet everybody's ignoring what's going on in San Francisco, you know. So obviously the drug addiction and the homelessness and the degradation of human life in San Francisco has kind of always been there, but it's never been so far reaching out into all the neighborhoods. It's now in my former neighborhood. It's now in some of the most posh neighborhoods that you could visit. There is a park up in Nob Hill, which is you walk straight up a hill from downtown. You're in kind of the Nob Hill Pacific Heights area, sort of, so to speak. And there's this city park there. It's called Lafayette Park, and it's really beautiful. Years and years and years ago, when I lived in Nob Hill, I used to walk up to that park and walk my Pomeranian. There's apparently somebody in Lafayette Park, like, up in a tree, like, throwing throwing things at tourists and throwing things at locals. So, it's like a jungle out there, Now some people might argue with me and say, "No, no, no, it's not like that. Yes, there's a lot of business closures, and yes, there's a lot of problems, but if you just stay in your designated area or just hold your nose as you quickly ride your 10,000 bike through the $10,000 bike through the tenderloin and close your eyes, you can just get through it and then you're in a nice area again." Is that is that right? Shouldn't everybody be aware, whether you live in a posh area and you're not yet truly affected by these degrading experiences? Shouldn't everybody be doing something to turn this around? So, where is the podcasting industrial complex to talk about this? There are a bunch of people on Twitter that are filming this day in and day out. There are a bunch of people on Twitter, just regular people like you, who just go to these harm reduction policy advocates or these, I forget what they're called, but they're sort of these individuals who are part of this harm reduction um, health practice, and have confronted them and said, more people have died of fentanyl overdose since the implementation of the harm reduction health policy. You're not helping, you're hurting. There are people dying on the street, and they will confront them, and the harm reduction people will just ignore them as if they don't really deserve any kind of conversation. They don't even deny what these people are accusing them of. They don't even deny that the death count has risen. 18 body bags were pulled out of apartments yesterday alone. This is a crisis. This is an equal crisis to Lahaina, believe it or not. You may as well have dropped a bomb on San Francisco and created refugees, because all the businesses are closed. The homeless situation has skyrocketed, just like it has in Lahaina. So, where is the informational industrial complex? These people who want to provide you, facts and good information about what's going on, where are they? Where are they? They're not there in my hometown. So, it's really disturbing to me. Um, I think that. What we are going to see with, I'm trying to get through all the um the the uh the comments here. So I think what we're going to see, just to wrap it up, I think what we're going to see, Max Egan, unfortunately I think you're wrong. I don't think we are going to see a smart city in Hawaii. I think what we're going to see in Maui specifically is more of what I see in Pittsburgh, which are incubators that are basically tagged as nonprofits or 501c3s, banks, and other nonprofits that are going to wash money and then turn that money into some sort of debt system for the victims. Sure, sure, the victims will be able to build back. Yeah, yeah, no problem. They'll just have to take out loans that they can never afford to pay back. It's so much cheaper to do it that way than it is to build out infrastructure. Um, I want to tell you about something I learned from Renette Senum, who is the former mayor of a small town, I believe in California or Nevada or something. She has her own Substack page, and she, does her own commentary and stuff. But what I found really cool about her, which I just learned, is that she's a descendant of um, Funston. So we have a Fort Funston in San Francisco, and Funston himself, in the early 1900s, was really instrumental in turning every San Francisco park into something really amazing. Plus, he was instrumental in capturing um, the Philippine president during I want to say, the Spanish American War. So she's a descendant of this guy. So it makes sense why she got into politics and why she's so successful and all this stuff. She has this name recognition, right? I never knew this before about her. But one thing she talked about was a legitimate incubator scenario that was set up during Katrina. This was over 20 years ago, before incubators um, in your communities of poverty, especially opportunity zones, or your designated poor communities in larger cities like Chicago or New York. Now they're everywhere. But back then, during Katrina, they weren't very well known. And I would say that ultimately Katrina became sort of the test balloon to trial out incubators. But there is one story that she told where an incubator was actually legitimate. And so what it was an heiress. Her name was Martha Murphy. She flew back into New Orleans to her estate only just to discover that it was completely destroyed or pretty much ravaged. The female officers and the UN officers that were there told her to turn around and go away. And she said, "Excuse me, do you know who I am? I'm the heiress of this vast oil fortune. Screw you. I'm going to stay and do my thing." They threatened to have her arrested. They even accused her of looting, which she wasn't. What she did is she brought in her own excavation crew. She brought in her own security detail. She paid for it out of her own money. And she helped her small community build back on its own by privately backing loans to them. Okay. And said, "I'm going to create this little incubator scenario where I will give you a loan and then you don't have to pay me back until after your business is up and running, no interest." And it worked because it was a private citizen doing something for her private community. It wasn't a bunch of nonprofits and banks no one's ever heard of and federal blah 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 and all this, which is what the incubator policy contract kinds of agreements are made of now. They're comprised of all of these scams, right, that are run through the federal government. So, but she did it on her own. And so I would even go so far as to say that they copied her and then exploited it, which is often what happens. You have something that works for a community and you exploit it. The government will exploit it. Just like with I want to say like the Black Panthers started their own after school food lunch program. And from that concept came EBT as we know it today, which is like a food stamp program. It was based on the way that this, community, which had been marginalized, they took care of their own, they took care of each other, and um, they created an after school system where the kids could have a place to go that was safe. They could be fed nutritious meals. And it was based around food, right? So, oftentimes in communities and in cultures, food is where it starts. And then you have the communities come together, gather around the table, and eat. And suddenly, ideas are discussed, things are written down, people make agreements with each other, and it's all community based. Well, the government co-opted that idea and turned it into food stamps. Okay, making it so that if you are in a poverty or situation, or you only make a certain amount of money per year, then you are eligible for food stamps. Okay, so sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. So what they did with the situation with the incubator is they turned Martha Murphy's really amazing idea and corrupted it. They really did. They turned it into a money laundering situation, and I think that that's what we're going to see with Maui as well. Um, so I wanted to correct that and steer people back into the right train of thought. And I wanted to ask a series of questions. And this is a little bit related, but it's a little bit of off the beaten track. So for this Friday episode, I'm already about 43 minutes into the stream. Let's take the next few minutes and let me ask you a series of questions. Is it more likely that local authorities in Maui would turn people away who are just approaching um, an intersection, say on a road where they were reaching safety? Is it more likely that that would happen? Or is it more likely that you're going to eat bugs? Ask yourself these questions. I mean, is it more likely that these sort of money washing or money laundering schemes through incubators, through banks no one's ever heard of, or through nonprofits, where corporations and anybody who's got their hands involved in these funding streams towards the victim of Maui, towards the Maui victims, is it more likely that that will be set up, or are you going to get billions of dollars funded into programs to create smart cities? Which is like if you were a corporate individual, what would be the bottom line? I mean, corporations are they they squeeze every little penny. They don't want to spend any money. They want to look for ways to financialize every little thing. It would cost billions of dollars to roll out smart city infrastructure, right? So, and then is it more likely to create a scenario where you can create a psychological and emotional warfare program by forcing vulnerable children to be a part of a circumstance every day, sometimes twice a day, that erodes their compassion gene or erodes their um, what it means, their idea of what it means to be a human being? Or is it more effective emotionally or catastrophically emotionally to burn them alive? You know, like think about who these corporations and these individuals and these programs, that are layered. They start with federal, and then you've got, CIA, and then you've got corporations, and then you've got nonprofits, and then you've got banks, and then you've got these little sort of, mom and pop incubator cells. What's going to benefit them more? Burning people alive or creating systems where people feel that they have no choice but to go back into the very thing that financializes them. Sorry, I don't mean to be crass. I know that there are a lot of unaccounted for deaths in Lahaina, but I want to tell you, I believe these influencers are not giving you a true depiction of what's to come. Now, when I see some individuals talking to various, citizen journos in Lahaina, and they're explaining the how the how the police had blockaded the roads, I believe that because that has happened in Paradise, California. That happened in uh, Haiti. That happened in Puerto Rico. Remember Puerto Rico years ago? That happened during the Trump administration. That happened in Katrina. That happened with every fire and with every flood, where once people are at a place where they can get to safety, all of a sudden, for some reason, they are turned around. So I believe the stories of the people that tell that story. Like, I believe them when they say, "The police were there telling us to go back into the fires. This was our only way out." I believe them. I don't know about some of the other things that are being said. If something is far too emotional and it triggers you to a place where you just are collapsing in grief because, 10,000 burned bodies were found on the side of the road, you might want to your check that, because if it's too emotional and it leaves this visual in your head that's just so horrible, then it's probably not true. Because what we have is not, it's a terrible thing what we're witnessing, but it's incremental and it's very benign. I'll tell you, I'll give you a small insight into what I'm talking about. Um, Somebody I know works for a very large company that's involved in the health industry. They're not a doctor or anything. They're just tech, okay? The company sent him an email um like on Monday night, so basically Tuesday morning. And it said that the Department of Homeland Security needs you to do a whole bunch of things and we need it in 4 days. And this person, you know, was not at home, had no access to any of the paperwork through the onboarding experience. I mean, when you get hired somewhere, it's called onboarding, and there's a ton of security stuff that you have to go through. And so they were like, once they actually read the small print and the fine print in the email, they were like, "Oh, this is all I need to do." And they didn't even need to be at home to do it. So this is what I'm saying. It's very benign, but when you first see it, I can easily see a podcaster taking that email and exploding it all over the globe and saying, "Oh my God, can you believe the Department of Homeland Security wants da 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 da?" And it sounds really scary. And this person did initially have kind of a scary, fucked up reaction to it. But once they got through the fine print, the small print, and realized what they actually needed to do, it was very benign. It was literally checking off a box. It was literally opening up a link and checking a box. That's it. That's all it was. And suddenly, somebody in the DHS and somebody in the corporation that they work for got their paycheck justified. You see what I'm saying? So much of this is benign. I don't know what the teachers are saying about the children. I kind of don't care because it's not going to be a smart city. Um, and so the takeaway about the children is what is causing you to have the reactions you're having. The lack of information, the lack of communication, and your imagination is getting away with going into all these crazy places, right? It doesn't help that you have influencers slash assets talking about, entire families being burned alive on the side of the road in their cars. I don't believe that. I simply don't believe that, guys. What I do believe is that though there were people who escaped, there were children who were probably left behind, and yes, there were some deaths. I do believe that. But what is very concerning to me, what is more concerning to me, are the people who were reaching a place of safety with their families, and then they were told by authority figures to turn around and go back into the unsafe zones, what I'm just calling unsafe zones, right? And then you have mainstream headlines saying, well, they disobeyed and they lived. So what kind of message is that about? Like, what kind of message are we being told there? I was having a conversation with a local friend of mine about this on Saturday. We were sitting um, on Mobile Bay, and she said, "What does that mean? What are they trying to tell us? That if mainstream media is splashing headlines all over the place that says because they disobeyed, they survived. We're all allowed to see that. What does that mean? Why are they allowing us to see that? So you have to start like being much less emotional about these things and much more pragmatic. I believe the story of UN designated uh, cops or officials directing traffic. I believe it because it's happened in Katrina. It happened in Puerto Rico. It happened in Paradise, California when the fires hit. It's happened in the Bay Area when there's been emergencies. Like I've seen it. Okay. So I believe that. And I believe the some of the victims were told to turn around and go back into the unsafe areas. I believe that. I'm not so sure I believe, a pile of dead bodies by the side of the road. I'm not so sure I believe that. When I'm over here looking at what's going on in San Francisco, when you do have a pile of dead bodies that are being pulled out of SROs, but because there's such a stigma attached to homelessness and drug use, no one wants to talk about the fact that 18 dead bodies were pulled from apartments yesterday as a result of um, overdose. I'm not sure who said, so somebody asked me, so if not burned, where are the people who were being burnt alive and ran to the ocean? I don't know. I'm not talking. This is about how Maui is not going to be a designated smart city. It's going to be a designated I don't know what you want to call it. I don't want to call it an opportunity zone, although they might designate it an opportunity zone so that incubators, banks no one's ever heard of, and nonprofits can launder money in order to bring the people who've been left homeless or the people who've been left, um, without an income in order to give them an opportunity to build their own areas back, but put them into debt in order to do so. That to me, that makes more sense than smart city infrastructure. As far as the bodies being burned alive and piles of bodies and this, that, and the other, there are other podcasters who talk about that, and you can just go listen to them. I don't know anything about it. But what I do know is that there were people that were in their cars. They weren't being burned alive. They were in their cars in a very slow line of traffic, and they were slowly getting out of the smoky area, and they were seeing blue skies, and then when they got to a particular intersection they were told to go back, and then so their only choice they felt was to go into the water. I don't know if they were being burned alive. When I watched them podcasting on their TikTok pages, they didn't seem like they were being burned alive. They seemed perfectly calm and rational, like, um, okay, so you don't want me to go to where it's safe. You want me to turn back around into the smoke. That doesn't sound like someone being burned alive to me. I've I've burned my hand before, like on the stove. And when I'm aware of it, I'm like, oh my God, ow, 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 and I put aloe on it. These people weren't acting that way. So, you know, um, So it's not only the biggest depopulation program in control of the survivors, but it's also a spiritual war against humanity's minds and souls. I don't like to go into spiritual stuff, and I don't even like to go into the Depop stuff. What I like to do is talk about what I know, and what I know is that individuals who are traumatized are easy to control, and individuals who are not given appropriate information, like you all, are easily led down crazy paths of hysteria. So let's get back on let's get focused on what's going to happen, because what's the only reason I say it is because it happened in Pittsburgh, it's happened in neighborhoods in Chicago, it's happened in neighborhoods in San Francisco, it's happened in neighborhoods in New York, it's happened all over the Midwest, it's happened in poor communities all over the South. They're called incubators. They are a debt industrial complex where you designate a zone as an emergency. They did it in New Orleans. They did it here in Biloxi. They they've done it all over Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is just riddled with this, where you have lots and lots of nonprofits that launder money to allegedly help victims or help poor people. And what it really does is it puts them into a debt program or a system where they have to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to have access to things like Section 8 housing. Okay. Yeah, Michelle, I don't know that. There are other podcasters that talk about that. I'm sure those people have gone live and done their own thing as their hair was on fire and they had to jump into the water. I don't know. I'm talking about the debt industrial complex and something that's just totally unrelated to what your favorite podcasters maybe are telling you. Um, And I also am pushing back on what Max Egan said in his latest video, which was that it was going to be a smart city. It's not going to be a smart city. Lahaina was full of Airbnbs and little surf shops and cool bougie coffee shops. So that is not the infrastructure for Airbnb. I'm sorry, for a smart city. San Francisco has the infrastructure for smart cities. And what I want to know is why nobody's talking about the 18 dead bodies that were pulled from apartments yesterday in San Francisco. Why isn't Max Egan talking about that? Why isn't your favorite podcaster talking about that? Why is it that everyone's screaming about the dead children in Lahaina that no one really can, tell you whether there is or there isn't dead children? And yet we have physical evidence of children in San Francisco being traumatized every single day because they have to step over broken glass, feces on the sidewalk, excrement on the sidewalk, junkies that are rolling around in their own feces. Why isn't anybody covering that? There's nobody who is um, covering any of the stuff that's actually going on. Why isn't anybody covering these money laundering incubators that are all over the country, especially concentrated in Pittsburgh, in neighborhoods of poverty? You know, and as far as the missing and the dead in Lahaina, sure, there are always missing or dead people when there is a fire, always. But that seems to be the only thing that people are talking about. And that's not what's making the country profitable. What's making the country profitable at this point is to designate zones that are considered qualifiable for emergency funding. It's why certain individuals can't get into Section 8, and yet other individuals can slide right in within 24 hours. You know, it's 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 not a good system. And I think that there are a lot of influencers out there that are leading people astray. And so I had to say something. It's boring, isn't it? It's not exciting. You'd much rather hear about dead burned babies than you would about how children in San Francisco have to step over needles and heroin addicts and fentanyl addicts and excrement lying on the street and broken glass just to get to their school bus to take them to school. Well, that you don't want to hear about that. You'd much rather hear about charred babies. So I'm just saying that I'm not, I'm not saying that it's all fake and that there's no dead bodies. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, why is something um, that is equally as tragic as not at all being covered by your favorite podcast stars? Um, Lahaina's not going to be a smart city, Michelle. Yeah, sure, it's a land grab, but not for what you think. When you think land grab, you think giant, sure, there will be some land grabs, I'm sure. But these people already have tons of land. The Oprahs and the Obamas and corporations, they already have tons of land. What they want is to financialize the people. The people. So if you imagine a giant group of people, you're not going to hear from the teachers and the parents because they're either told not to talk or there's nothing to talk about. So when you look at individuals who are in an impoverished situation, whether it's they live in a community of poverty, um, there are no smart cities. Smart cities are a psyop. When you look at a community of poverty, when you look at a community that's been ravaged by fire or flood, they're not looking at the land. They're looking at the people who are now in refugee status. So
that's what you've been saying all along.
this is,
You are the product. You are the
since 2015, I have been saying you are the product. You are the thing that they are going to mine for profit. Your body, your physical body, your brain through social media, they're mining it for profit. Your body through trauma, they're mining for profit, whether you go through the medical industrial complex or you go through the emergency, monetization industrial complex, because you are a victim of some kind of circumstance which is deemed a federal emergency. It's all about taking a piece, you're lopping off your arm, lopping out your eye, taking off it's you. Oprah doesn't need any more land. She already bought all the land she needs. Now she wants the people. She's creating these foundations in order to mine money out of the individuals who will take on the debt to build back better. You are going to be the thing that builds back better. It's going to affect you personally. Land schmand, who cares? You know what I'm saying? Like, they already have all the land. Now they want something more. They're greedy. So I don't, I'm sorry if I'm getting impatient, but I've been saying this for 10 years now. And there are plenty of people out there who have also been saying the same thing, but there are influencers and podcasters and assets that will lead you down false roads. And Max Egan is one of them. There were some things that he did bring in his latest video, which I found to be like, okay, that I can get behind. But much of what he says is not on track. Much of what he says does not track with what's happening in the real world. But for people who live like Max Egan and other podcasters who live in privilege and are just, living this existence where they don't have to deal with any of the things that you and I are dealing with, they don't know. If you tried to talk about incubators with Max Egan, he would think you were talking about an incubator for a chicken, to hatch an egg or something. I'm talking about incubator cells within this country that funnel money in order to create a debt system for people who are in an emergency type of situation. So it's a good concept, but unfortunately, it's been corrupted by the government. So that's what's going on. That's what I'm, kind of, that's what I wanted to go live for, and just explain all this to you. I'm thankful that you all were able to listen, and I'm thankful and appreciative of the people who've made the comments. I do appreciate that. But I also want to get people off this idea of smart city. You're going to be 100 years old and never see a smart city, but you will see your entire country in debt in some way, and you'll see more suicides and drug addiction. There is nothing more unsexy than watching 18 body bags being pulled out of apartments in downtown San Francisco as a result of a drug overdose. That's pretty unsexy, isn't it? It's much more sexy to talk about, Lahaina, right? And what happened there. But we need to pull our focus to what's happening in San Francisco. And this is half the problem. And I'll go ahead and end here because it's been over an hour. But this is half the problem with what's going on in San Francisco is you've got people who are living this nightmare, this apocalyptic nightmare where children have to step over fentanyl bodies just to get to school, and not even a podcaster with influence is talking about it. That's how you know it's real. So hopefully, people will start to wake up and realize that when you want to see what real corruption looks like, then you need to turn to San Francisco. Don't get distracted with, directed energy weapons and smart cities and blah, 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 and all that. You need to look to San Francisco, or you need to look to Pittsburgh. This is what your country is turning into: poverty, debt, and a degrading experience of human life, so that it normalizes the zombification of humans. That's what it is. That's a lot cheaper than billion-dollar programs for smart city infrastructure. It's a lot cheaper to do that. So let's turn to Pittsburgh. Let's turn to San Francisco. Let's take a look at what's going on with these cities, what's really happening. And unfortunately, it's very boring, or it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. You're just like, ooh, I don't want to talk about drug addicts and homelessness. I'd rather talk about fires and directed energy weapons. Do you really think that they're going to spend trillions of dollars in directed energy weapons when all you have to do is look at San Francisco? It's costing them no money at all to kill more people. I would say more people over the last couple of years have died in San Francisco as a result of these disgusting programs than other places that you think lots of people died. So, anyway, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm really, really thankful that, I do have some followers who get it. I just had a brief conversation with a friend who told me she lives in San Francisco and she's just kind of holding on and hanging in there. And, good. Hold the line. Hang on. It's okay. I get it. This is a really, really scary situation, and it's most likely within the next maybe 5 to 10 years we are going to see more smart city infrastructure in San Francisco because it's already there. You're not going to see it in vacation resort islands. You're going to see it in cities that have, that are very, very close to the leader in technology, like for instance, China, right? That makes more sense, doesn't it? Come on. I know you guys can think. I know you're capable of thinking. I think that what's happened over the last few years is that so much information is coming at you all the time. Well, this is your new normal. I keep telling you, I've told you this since March 13th of 2020. Every single day is another 9/11. Every single day is another situation. And every traumatic incident that takes place, you forget about the one that took place before. We are long overdue for a school shooting, right?
And I want to say, can I
Yeah.
add? You can repeat what I'm saying.
Okay. So JP's saying something.
This comes back to what we've been saying for a long time, and that is it's about the mundane,
Right.
not the extraordinary.
Right.
They're
So,
gonna dazzle you with the extraordinary,
right.
but what they're gonna fuck you with is the mundane.
Right. So once again he stressed something I said at the beginning of this. It's the mundane, it's the benign. They're going to dazzle you with the extraordinary. They're going to dazzle you with things like directed energy weapons, but it's really the mundane that you have to watch out for. Look at your own life. Look how difficult it is to, make ends meet. Look how challenging it is for you to just get what you need in life. Maybe you don't have any challenges. Well, we sure do. We're dancing on a pin over here. Like the challenges are, and, you know, overwhelming if to just get from day to day to day. That's the mundane. That's the benign.
With Iraq, it was the shock and awe.
Right.
With
So,
9/11, it was the collapse of the buildings. But what happened after that?
right.
The money was made from debt and
Right.
misery.
Right.
Both of those cases. Same thing with Afghanistan.
Right.
All of those are the same playbook as what's going on right now, but now it's being directed directly at us.
Right. So it's the same playbook as 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq, shock and awe, the collapse of the buildings. And then, of course, what comes after is the mundane, the benign, the box checking, the boring, you know? So, yeah. So I want to, make sure that people understood that because it's easy to fall into the trap of allowing these other circumstances to take hold of your own life, and then when your own life is falling apart, you know anybody who doesn't have a roof over their head right now, anyone who's even the slightest bit unhappy, whether you're unhappy in your relationship or your job or your situation, you need to put all of that aside, all of this, dazzling Lahaina story and all this bullshit. You need to put that aside and focus on yourself. And if you have to go through some systems of some boring, benign, troubling, difficult box checking systems in order to get where you need to go, in order to take care of yourself, like we've had to do a few times in our life, you're going to have to do that, or else you're going to just find yourself on the street one day wondering, what happened because you cared so much about Lahaina. You know what I'm saying? So I think that a lot of these influencers and these podcasters are designed, they're put there as assets to keep people from focusing on what's happening right in front of them. Now, there are some very good, informative people out there, and I've mentioned them before. I don't need to mention them again. And I would recommend that you do follow them because they will tie in circumstances and situations that will directly affect you. So that's a good thing. Um, but not Max Egan. He's not doing anyone any favors. All right. I want to thank you again for listening today. Follow up with questions if you have. Leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening in on. Leave a comment. I check comments pretty regularly. I can get back to you. Anything else that you might want to add. I really, really do appreciate the feedback, the comments, the focus, the listening, everything. And I hope that everybody's doing well. All right. Talk to you later. Have a happy weekend.